Good evening, everyone. Today, I'll be presenting to you about the Japanese occupation. So, to start with, the Japanese occupation of the Philippines presents a complex and often contradictory narrative. While characterized by brutality and oppression, it also witnessed acts of resistance, collaboration, and surprising displays of cultural exchange. These reports, together with my co-reporter, will be navigating these complexities, offering a better understanding of this dark chapter of the nation's history. So, in the 1920s and 1930s, the Philippines experienced a period of relative peace that was disrupted by the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Following this, the Japanese forces targeted military installations in the Philippines, such as the Clark Airfield and Nichols Airfield, also ang katong Sangli Airfield, para mas mawikin ang American defenses sa Pacific. As a result, the Commonwealth government prioritized a defense of the Philippines, enacting the National Defense Act to establish military forces, including a reserve and active infantry, an air corps, and a navy. In 1941, American and Philippine military forces were unified under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, forming the United States Armed Forces in the Far East, USAFFE. So, during sa colonialization sa Americans, we undeniably experienced peace during that time under sa colonialization sa American. But then, ning-abot ang Japanese occupation. Ning-abot ang invasion sa Japanese, which is ning-start sila og bomb sa Pearl Harbor, which is ang kaning Pearl Harbor is only siya sa American sa Hawaii. Ilatong ni bomb para mas way siya para i-treat ang mga American. I-treat ang mga American sa ilahang pag-invade sa Philippines, because gusto nila invade ang Philippines. It's because of their aim. Na sila aim na gusto nila ipatupad sa Philippines. And also kontra nila ang American. That's why gusto pud nila nga kanang kalabanan ng Philippines, which is American, na siya sa Philippines nag-colonize. And so kining tulo ka airfields, which is ang Clark Airfield, ang Nichols Airfield, ug ang Sangley Point Airfield, own ko ni siya sa Americans, which is gibombahan sa mga Japanese. So kaning tulo ka airfields is own siya sa American, just like what I said. So ang kaning Clark Airfield is mao ni siya ang pinaka-base nga US military force, US Air Force sa American. Also ang kaning Nichols Air Base is mao ni siya ang US Army Air Forces base, while ang Sangley Point Air Base is mao ni siya ang US Navy base. So during sa occupation is ang kaning Japanese is ilahang control ning tulo ka airfields. It's because gusto nila ning i-control para mas ma-improve ang ilahang trainings, or like kanang gusto nila nga punduhan ning tulo ka airfields, sila i-control kay para mas ma-improve ang ilahang military forces. That's why ilang i-control. But then after sa fast forward na ta, but then after sa katong war is na-return kaya pa siya balik ang tulo ka airfield sa Philippines, which is ang Clark Airfield and ang Sangley Point Airfield is gi-turn over siya sa Philippine government, while ang kaning Nichols Airfield is mo siya ang rename nga Ninoy Aquino International Airport, which is remains still under the Philippines government control. So, ang kaning pag-control sa mga Japanese sa kaning airfields is like katong magong invade na ni Japanese sa Philippines sa 1942, nakuan sila kanang na-overwhelm sila sa mga forces American. Kanang dili kanang na overwhelm ang Americans sa ilahang forces, sa ilahang threat, which is unprepared ang mga Americans sa ilahang sudden attack. Mao to nga kanang ang American militaries or ang forces or troops outnumbered sila and then outgunned. Mao to nga nag-retreat dayon sila pag invade ay pagsalakay sa mga Japanese. And also kanang American militaries are lack of resistance, meaning kanang ang airfields, ang forces sa American nga nasa airfields is gamay lang siya, and then they were lack of sufficient air and ground support. Wala kayo sila support that time na nag-invade na start ang mga Japanese. So that's why contribute sila, retreat sila sa mga Japanese, sa mga American, wherein kanang they were unable to sustain their defense within sa forces sa mga Japanese. Also, what's the purpose nga nung gi-control or like nganong gi-seized up to sa mga Japanese ang tulo ka airfields? Ang purpose ato nganong gining ato to sa mga Japanese is that na-recognize mo sa mga Japanese militaries nga usa to siya ka strategic importance ang katong Clark Air Base, Nicole Air Base, and Sangley Point Air Base. Strategic importance siya wherein kuan kanang gusto nila og air superiority, wherein gusto nila nga establish ang air superiority over in the Philippines, in which it would allow them to launch air raids against ilang mga allied forces, makontrol sila og air routes, and mas mapadali ang ilahang operations between nations and other neighboring countries. Also, gihimo to nila og kanang training and operations. Ang mga Japanese is like gigamit to nila nga mga airfields para i-train ang ilang mga pilots, ang ilang mga aircrews, para mas maka-provide sila og kanang mas mapa-improve ang ilang delivery of goods between sa kanang silang gikampuhan or sa mga other place pa nga mag-invade sila, or asa pa tong mga nakalugar ang ilang other forces or ilang military allies. And so kanang next slide na tayo is, during sa World War II, Japan along with Italy and Germany formed the Axis powers. The US and Great Britain adopted the Euro First policy, prioritizing the defeat of Nazi Germany while simultaneously fighting Japan in the Pacific with fewer resources. Japan, aiming to liberate Asia from Western colonialism, proclaimed its Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, promising independence to colonize Asian countries while establishing Japanese authority in the region. This led to the Japanese invasion and occupation of the Philippines, a US colony from December 1941 to September 1945. And also, I didn't mention that during sa pagbomb sa mga Japanese is dito na paggawas of first legislative act of which is what we called National Defense Act to establish military forces. I didn't mention that. Nandito na din ang paggawa sa Defense Act ang Commonwealth, Government Commonwealth sa Philippines. Kay na-draw naman tayo into conflict. Kaya na may bombing nga nahitabo. Dahil ito ang first legislative act ng paggawa sa Commonwealth. So, moving on. This led to Japanese invasion and occupation of the Philippines. So, can you see Italy and Germany with Japan, along with Italy and Germany? Nag-form sila of Axis powers. So, unsa may mga Axis powers? So, kanang Axis powers is, mao ni siya ang group sa mga nations or sa mga countries nga nag-share sila og ideologies o aim. Na sila yung shared aim ba? Kumbaga, gusto nila ito makamit na mga aim. But then, Japan, Italy, and Germany, sila lang ang pinaka-main or which is considered as most, dili po most kanang na kanang much more mga kanang mga maka-influence or more powerful than the other countries, kaning tulo. So, the US and Great Britain adopted the Europe first. Ay kanimo mga Axis power is daghan sila nga countries. But then, tulo lang pinaka-main nga i-highlight diri. So, gi-follow sa US and Britain ang Europe first policy. So, what is Europe first policy? Ang Europe first policy is aim po sa mga American collaborated with Great Britain na unahon nila unahon nila to fight ang or unahon nila pag-defend tung naa sa Europe before sila mo drawn into conflict sa Pacific area, which is ang katong invasion sa Japanese. So, kuan mo gud ang nag-start ang World War II katong gi-invade ug start sa Germany ang Poland, which is ang Poland is belong na siya sa Europe. That's why ganun gi-follow nila ang Europe first nga policy. It's because they saw or they considered Germany as much bigger threat para sa ilaha kay mas among the three man ang Japan, ang Italy, and ang Germany ang mas we could say mas pinaka powerful or mas kanang mas ma-influence kaysa sa tulo. That's why ilahang unahon og kanang defend ang Europe and then unahon nila defeat ang Nazi Germany kay because they believe na if ma-defeat na nila ang Nazi Germany is mausan nila ang force or mas ma-diverge na nila ang focus sa Japan, which is they think kanang kaya na nila to, unlike sa Germany is mas di consider mo as dako ang Germany maglubos sila og pildi. That's why unahon sa nila to ang big threat. But then while nag-fight sila sa Germany sa Europe, ang uban pod nga military sa American is napoy nindrom pa sila sa conflict sa Japanese invasion. Meaning, while nakig-away sila sa Europe, nakig-away po ang uban dito sa Pacific area, which is ang Japan invasion. Meaning, kanang ang American is, they faced two front fight between sa Europe and sa Pacific. That's why. So, it's stated here, Japan aiming to liberate Asia from Western colonialism. So, why Japan invaded Philippines? It is because knowing Philippines is under sa American. And then, ang Japan is gusto nila nga ma-free ang nation sa Western colonialism. Gusto nila nga ma-free from Western influences ang Philippines. And that's why ning-invade sila. It's because gi-proclaim nila ang Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere wherein gusto nila ning i-establish ni nga GEACPS GEACPS kay gusto nila nga i-establish ma-unite ang mga nations but then under silang leadership, under silang control. That's why. And then promising independence. Gusto nila nga nag-promise sila nga ma-independent ang ubang nations para mas mag-promise sila og independence para mas ma-colonize pa nila ang ubang Asian countries and mas mapalago ang ilahang own cultures, ang ilahang unsay ilahang aim. Magpakanara sa Japan ang ilahang promise nga independence among nations. So, mo to kanang while ang Japan nag-attack siya sa Pearl Harbor atong 1941, atong while nag-fight ang American ug ang Germany, mo pud naka-divert sa attention sa American nga mobalhin na po sila sa Pacific kay tunan ning gara ang mga Japanese og invade na sila invade sa Philippines. So, and then ang Philippines as being an American colony na invade na sa Japan, nahimo na ang battleground ang Philippines. It's because mas man siya kanang bantang siya sa area between sa conflict sa duha ka group or duha ka forces which is ang Japan ug ang American. Mura siya nahimo siyang key battleground between sa war. So, on December 9, 1941, news of the Pearl Harbor bombing reached Manila, causing fear and panic among Filipinos who began evacuating and hoarding food. So, after ato nga news sa Pearl Harbor is na-disseminate na ito nga info na nanitabo nga bombing nakatag na siya sa Manila na spread na siya nga news na to nga nag-start again og natarantan ang mga Filipinos and then nag-start sila evacuate nag-start sila stock of food. And also Lourdes Reyes Magnola, a 14-year-old girl at that time, recalls kaning excerpt is gikan ni Lourdes Reyes kaning excerpt. So, recalls how she initially saw war as an interruption for her exams. So, on December 8, while traveling with her mother and grandmother, they learned that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, marking the start of the war for the Philippines. As Japanese forces began landing in various parts of Luzon, the Commonwealth government evacuated to Corregidor, and USAFFE forces retreated to Bataan. Despite declaring Manila an open city in December 26, it was bombed by the Japanese. President Quezon's mandate was renewed in Corregidor amidst the ongoing attacks. On April 9, 1942, after 3 months of enduring air attacks and naval blockade, the USAFFE forces in Bataan surrendered. So, Lourdes Reyes Montinola is a young recall ang iyang experiences that time na nakita niya nga na naka-witness pa siya nga kanang ang ato nga bombing is i-consider na niya as an interruption sa iyang exams because we know from a child perspective nga may tao bombing. If ipatungo naman ba ang child's perspective say about bombing is dili lang gid sila matalanta. It's because ang ilang idea na is katong nga bombing is kung interruption to silang classes, interruption sa silang exams. Ano iyang viewpoint as a 14-year-old girl at that time na nahitabo ning pag-invade sa mga Japanese sa Philippines. Katong na-disseminate ang information sa within the place of Manila. And so, as Japanese forces began landing in various parts of Luzon, the Commonwealth government evacuated. Katong na dagdingdaghan na ang mga Japanese sa part sa Luzon, ning balhin ang katong Commonwealth government sa koridor and dito nagpadayon ang leadership ni President Quezon Manuel. And so, after the kuan abisan pa sa kanang mga ongoing attacks is naglayon naghapon iyang leadership dito, and after 3 months nag-injured rin ng attacks and mga naval blockade is ni-retreat ni surrender na jud ang USAFFE forces. It's because just like what I said kanina, gamay ra sila and then mas daghan na ang Japanese, daghan sila na control, daghan sila mga military na kanang kuan nang invade, unlike sa Filipino and American forces which is outgunned sila, wa kay sila naka-prepare, and also kanang nag-injure na sila o kanang kuan that time kanang pain or like fatigue, daghan sila gi-injured, that's why kanang ning surrender na lang sila. And so, war starts in the Philippines exert from breaking the silence. So breaking the silence, it's still part of the primary source coming from Lourdes, which is a 14-year-old girl. So, on December 9, 1941, news of the Pearl Harbor bombing reached Manila, prompting Philippines to evacuate safer areas and stockpile food in anticipation of further Japanese attacks. An excerpt from Lourdes Reyes within Roswell Wab, breaking the silence, recounts her experiences during that time. So, same naman siya sa ano. So, primary source. At first, the war seemed exciting for children as is interrupted exams. This is what I've said earlier, from a child perspective. Dili pa sila, ang ilang pagtanaw sa situation is, dili pa seryoso. Pila kang himong interruption na silang exams. And so, kanang, it highlighted here, it stated here also nga, in focusing instead on the missed opportunity to buy suman and clay pots in Antipolo. So, si Lourdes is a 14-year-old girl. Bisan pa og nanay bombing nga nitabo na mga threats gikan sa Japanese invasion is mas na-worry pa siya sa iyang na-missed opportunity nga makapalit siya og suman and clay pots sa Antipolo together with her grandmother. Imbis nga tanaw niya ang serious part sa bombing is as a child mas na ginuna pa niya to nga na-miss niya ang opportunity nga makapalit sila og suman or clay pots, maka-shopping sila. Wala kay siya na worry. And that coming from a child's perspective. And so, April 9, 1942 from Malinta Tunnel Corridor. After the fall of Bataan on April 9, 1942, Filipino-American troops were forced to march from Bataan to San Fernando, Pampanga. This march under the heat of the sun affected soldiers' hunger, dehydration, and fatigue to the point of death. Thus, the event earned for itself an infamous title, the Death March. So, the fall of Bataan made the Japanese forces concentrate on bombing Corridor, the rock fortress of the Americans. On May 6, 1942, USAFFE Commander-in-Chief Jonathan Wainwright surrendered the entire USAFFE forces and the Philippines to General Masaru Huma. So, after ganing surrender ng Bataan atong 1942, on April 9, dito na dayon tong start sa kanang nga infamous title which is the Death March. Diri na ang hunger, very dark na ning episode sa invasion sa Japanese, which is diri na ang hunger, devastation, dehydration, fatigue, and other brutality nga gihimo sa mga Japanese. Kaya ang mga Japanese mga is like diri na to ang forced labor, ang ilahang inhuman punishment sa mga Filipinos katong makabalo lang sila nga anti-Japanese kailan na din kang bitayon. That was a very brutal nga nahitabo sa mga Filipinos, wherein ang mga women that time is ginarape, inalugos, naka-experience sila og sexual harassment and etc., which is kaya nga very dark episode sa experience sa mga Filipino people, and also sa mga militaries, which is they endure a lot of pain, a lot of pain from kuan sa ilang palang war, and then losses of families, and then sa mga inhuman treatment sa mga Japanese atong ilang i-aristohon ang mga Filipinos bisag wala sakto nga sala, ilang tripan dala na ang kanang nahitabo tong Death March. Also, on May 6, 1942, si Commander-in-Chief Jonathan Wainwright, which is a military from American, is gisurrender na jud niya ang USAFFE forces sa Philippines ni General Masaru Huma, which is a Japanese military. Kay